What I'm doing today is kind of a new thing. This is the first time I've ever done it in my Life and Teaching of Jesus class. But as I was thinking about it last week, and I thought it made a lot of sense to do this. I think I told you 2 class periods ago that most of the books that are written today on the life of Jesus, the historical Jesus, don't talk at all about this dimension of his life. I did my dissertation on the temptation narrative, and most of the modern texts on the life of Jesus didn't talk about the temptation narrative at all. So they obviously thought that it fell outside of the realm of history, technically speaking. And yet, if you look at the New Testament, if you look at the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, one of the principal motifs of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John is this interaction between Jesus, who is the key protagonist, and Satan, or the devil, who is the key antagonist. And so I guess I'm going on record today as a protester of the tendency of modern scholars to not treat this as a motif. Presumably they do so because when you talk about the devil, demons, etc., you're talking about the spiritual world, not the physical world, so therefore it is by definition not part of the historical Jesus. Well, I don't know if that's satisfactory. Most scholars, even today, critical scholars, will admit that Jesus was famous as a healer and as an exorcist. If they're willing to admit that he was a healer and an exorcist, then they've got to do something with the substance of those things. What did he exorcise? If it wasn't something that was spiritual. And so, what I want to do today is sort of follow up on what I introduced you to the last class period. We ended the last class by viewing Spencer's video, which was a video done to Mick Jagger and the Rolling Stones song, Sympathy for the Devil. That's the title of the song. Do You Know My Name? It's a cool song. I've always liked the song. And Mick Jagger even makes an appearance. I don't know if you noticed that. Towards the end of the video, he even makes an appearance, sort of a incarnation, so to speak, of the subject of the song. And so it was very cleverly done. And some people think that Mick Jagger probably sold something to the devil anyway. Fill in the blank. but the point is that I wanted to sort of spin off of that song, because do you know my name? What a great question to ask. Because I'm a student of ancient history. That's my field, and ancient religion. And so one of the things that I did was, in this handout, was I handed out to you some of the names in ancient mythology, ancient religion, some of the names given to this evil spirit. Devil, Satan, Beelzebul, Beelzebub, Belial, Beliar, Diabolos, 666, Prince of the Demons, God of this world, the Evil One, Mastema, Samael, Melchirah, the beast, Antichrist, the serpent, the tempter, the seducer, the trickster, the evil spirit, the prince of the power of the air, Lucifer, the destroyer, the dragon, Leviathan, monster of the deep, Ma'at, the eater, Angramanyu, Ashram, Tiamat, Apophis, Lotan, Yam, father of lies, Mot, Iblis, Virtra, and death. I go through in my class on comparative religions, I go through quite a few of these names. Many of them you recognize came from the New Testament. A few of them come from the Hebrew Scriptures. But most of these, or most of the rest of them, come from other religious traditions outside of the Judeo-Christian stream. And in my class, Comparative Religions, I spend some time filling in some of the information about that. So if you're more interested in this subject, sign up for my class, for that class. Those are just a few of the ancient names. Of course, there's a lot of modern names. I mean, this goes to about Iblis is the word for the devil in the Quran. So I guess we're up to the 6th century here at least with the Quran. And the Arabic word Iblis is simply sort of a fracture of the name of the devil in the New Testament, which is Diabolos, which means slanderer. Diabolos sort of became Iblis in Arabic. So anyway, the derivation of the name in the Quran is from the presence of his name Diabolos in the New Testament and in the Old Testament, where Diabolos is occasionally a translation of Satan. On the second page of this handout, I've given you a little bit of a breakdown on where the number 666 comes from. I'm not sure I'm going to get into this at all today, but I can talk about it for a minute. The reference comes from the Apocalypse of John, chapter 13, verse 16. And he causes all, the small and the great, the rich and the poor, the free and the slave, to be given a mark on their right hand or on their forehead. And he provides that no one should be able to buy or to sell except the one who has the mark, either the name of the beast or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast. For the number is that of a man, and his number is 666. This number 666 occurs in some manuscripts of the book of Revelation. Most of the manuscripts that come from the eastern part of the empire have 666. We have some variations in the manuscripts of the book of Revelation. The other variation that we have is 616. These are manuscripts that come from the west. The number itself goes back to the Roman emperor who lived in the 60s. His name was Nero. If you've ever studied ancient history or Roman history, or even the history of the early church, you've heard of this guy's name. He was an emperor in Rome in the late 50s, early 60s. He was responsible for the first state-sponsored persecution of Christians in the Roman Empire. It was probably under his mantle, by his hand, that Paul met his death, that Peter met his death, and that many, countless others died. Brutal deaths. The stories about the Christians that died during the reign of Nero are almost more gruesome than you want to even think about. If you write out his name and turn all of the letters, the Hebrew letters, into a number, you get one of these two numbers. If you write it out, well, I've given you the two names. There are two ways of spelling. If you spell it in Greek, it ends in an N. If you spell it in Latin, it doesn't. So actually, the Greek spelling of the word, which occurs in the eastern part of the empire, the west, of course, is in Italy and northern Africa, where they spoke Latin. The Latin spelling of the word has no N at the end. The Greek spelling of the word has an N, so you have another letter to add to the number. So he was the first Antichrist in the church, in the history of the church. Or if he wasn't the first, he was at least the one who gave birth to this number. The number continued to be used in the early church to refer to Antichrist figures. Probably the book of Revelation was written in the 90s during the reign of Domitian. Domitian was another emperor who initiated a persecution of the Christians. And so it's easy to see why this number 666 continued to be used in reference to the prophetic and expected Antichrist figure. It's also kind of clever because numbers are very important in the book of Revelation. Numbers are very important in all apocalyptic literature. You'll find, for example, the number 7 occurs over 50 times in the book of Revelation. The number 7 was a number of perfection in Hebrew theology. And so the number just shy of perfection is the number 6, and so this guy is thrice shy of perfection. Of course, the perfect number would be 777, and so he is 666. Worked out pretty well. I'm going to wait for a few minutes before we start talking about this other handout that I gave you. Let's go over here to the board. The reason that I want to spend a little bit of time talking about this is that there is a large portion of Jesus' teaching where Jesus comes across as very much a pacifist. He's very passive, nonviolent, turn the other cheek. Love your enemies. We're going to see this when we look at the sermon. And we will spend time on this. But there's almost a completely different dimension to Jesus and his public ministry, which is almost the flip side of the coin, almost the opposite of this. Jesus says things, for example, like, I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. His ministry is portrayed as an invasion of the kingdom of God into the kingdom of darkness. He's portrayed as having an enemy who engineers his death, and Jesus, by submitting to that death, secures a victory over this kingdom of darkness. So on the one side of Jesus, there's this sort of macabre, spiritual battle going on. On the other side, there's this Jesus who's a compassionate, merciful, nonviolent person. Part of the enigma and difficulty of studying Jesus and his life and teachings is encountering and trying to reconcile these two. So, for the moment at least, I would like to focus on this, okay? And erase this, at least for now. We'll get back to this. Cosmological dualism. Cosmological dualism is how I would describe the worldview of early Christianity. If you don't know what cosmological dualism is, then pay attention. Dualism implies two, okay? The opposite of dualism is called monism. Monism implies one. The difference between these two is more complicated than I can even describe in one sentence. We spend quite a few lectures in my class on comparative religion talking about the differences between monism and dualism. Christianity is a dualistic religion. It's not a pure dualism, because a pure dualism actually asserts that there is a good God and an evil God, and these two have equal powers, and they're doing battle with one another. Christianity is a little bit of a diluted dualism, because although there is a cosmological battle going on, the enemies or the two sides aren't equal. So here's dualism. Imagine that this is the cosmos. This is the created world. And we're in here. This is the created world, the sky, the sea, the earth, the stars, everything that's created. Everything that has mass or substance, the material world. Outside of this circle, we can say, is the spiritual world. What cosmological dualism proposes is that there is actually a fracture in not just the cosmological world, but the spiritual world. In fact, primarily the spiritual world, where we have good and evil. And they're doing battle. They're doing battle. There's a war going on at the cosmological level, at the spiritual level. There's a war. Monism does not have this in its worldview. Monism might have spirits of calamity and spirits that bring disease and things like that, but that's what these spirits are supposed to do. They're just doing their job. In cosmological dualism, you have malicious spirits who are going way past just causing you problems. They want to do more than just cause malady and discomfort. They want to destroy you. They want to destroy all of the works of God. So there's a war. We're kind of in the middle of it. So over on this side we have God, angels, we have God's people. Here we've got the devil, demons, and evil people. Good and evil. A fundamental way of perceiving all of reality is good and evil. Sounds simplistic, doesn't it? Believe me, it's not. It is not simplistic at all. This is probably one of the most profound and rational explanations of reality that there is. In fact, you probably noticed when you did your paper on the parables of Jesus and Matthew that this dichotomy, good and evil, occurs over and over and over and over again. Remember? Good, evil. Good, bad. Fruitful, fruitless. Dead, alive. It's very broad in its sweep, okay? So on this side, we have the kingdom. Oh, and here's another thing about, at least about the New Testament. It would appear that somehow this evil kingdom, and let's call it the kingdom of darkness because that's one of the ways that Jesus refers to it, the kingdom of darkness, the dark side, if you're into Star Wars, Darth Vader and all that, the dark side. This kingdom of darkness, I mean, this split isn't half and half. In fact, when Jesus comes, it is pictured as him entering into the kingdom of darkness, which includes everything inside this circle. This is almost the assumption behind the offer made by the devil to Jesus in the temptation narratives. Worship me and I will give you all the kingdoms of the world. Now, you might just simply decide to say, well, he was lying, that wasn't a bona fide offer. Actually, I think that that's not quite right. I think that actually it was a bona fide offer and that he actually does have them. He's sort of, what's the word? Can't think of the word I'm looking for. He's in control. He's in control of all of this. And that's why when Jesus, in Luke chapter 11, is being questioned about his casting demons out in exorcism, he's accused of casting out demons by the power of Beelzebul. Remember this? Luke chapter 11. And he says, you know, that's just not true. In fact, it's stupid. Because the devil isn't that stupid. His kingdom would fall if he was engaged in the destruction of his own territory. And he's not that foolish. Then he says this, but if it is by the finger of God that I cast out these demons, then the kingdom of God has come upon you. Now that, to me, is the most clear statement that his coming into the world is an invasion. It's the clearest statement in the Gospels. So he says, if I am doing this by the power of God, then the kingdom of God, KG, then the kingdom of God has come upon you. So Jesus coming into the world is pictured here as an invasion. Other ways of describing this is the kingdom of God, or the place where God rules, the kingdom of light, while this is the kingdom of darkness. Jesus coming into the world is also pictured in the Gospel of John as light coming into darkness. Remember this? Light and darkness. These are fundamental, sweeping statements about who he is and what he's doing. Fundamental. If you leave these out, you're left with little bits and pieces of stuff from which it's hard to picture a cogent Jesus at all. So the offer of the kingdoms in the testing story, I think, was legitimate. I'm not sure, I mean, that raises problems. You probably sense this, right? You're probably aware of this. This raises problems. Because didn't God create all of this? And didn't he say all this was good? And don't we always say God made the world and God is sovereign? And yet here we're pictured, or we're presented as a sort of sweeping worldview that's used to describe Jesus and what he's up to as very different than that. So let's take it a step at a time. Okay? First of all, I think it was a bona fide offer. Just because the devil is portrayed in not just the Gospels, but all through the New Testament as the God of this world, the ruler of the prince of the air, the ruler of all the kingdoms in the world. I want you to look at something. Revelation chapter 13. Imagine for just a minute, okay? Imagine for just a minute that when Jesus was out in the desert with the devil, and the devil said, "Worship me, and I will give you all of these kingdoms." Imagine just for a second that Jesus took him up on it. Okay, I know it's a bit of a stretch, but imagine it happened. Because it did happen in Revelation chapter 13. Let me read a passage to you. In Revelation chapter 13, there are two beasts talked about. One of the beasts is the devil. The other one is one of his protégés. This is Revelation 13. Now let's just read the whole chapter. He stood on the sand of the seashore, and I saw a beast coming up out of the sea, having 10 horns and 7 heads, and on his horns were 10 diadems, and on his heads were blasphemous names. And the beast which I saw was like a leopard, and his feet were like those of a bear, and his mouth like the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power and his throne and great authority. And I saw one of his heads as if it had been slain, and his fatal wound was healed. And the whole earth was amazed and followed after the beast. And they worshipped the dragon. The dragon here is one of the names in the book of Revelation for the devil. I'll show you that in a minute on my chart. Because he gave his authority to the beast. They worshipped the dragon because he gave his authority to the beast. This is what almost happened in Luke chapter 4. And they worshiped the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast, and who is able to wage war with him?" And there was given to him a mouth speaking arrogant words and blasphemies and authority to act for 42 months. And he opened his mouth in blasphemies against God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle and those who dwell in heaven. And it was given to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. And authority over every tribe and people and tongue and nation was given to him. Things are looking pretty bad here, aren't they? And all who dwell on the earth will worship him, everyone whose name has not been written from the foundation of the world in the book of the life of the Lamb who has been slain. The Lamb. That word, the Lamb, that's a reference in the book of Revelation to Jesus. It occurs over 30 times as a reference to the Lamb. He's also referred to as the Lion of the tribe of Judah. So we've got sort of these almost contradictory perspectives of Jesus. He's a lion and a lamb. Can you imagine any two less similar animals than that? If anyone has an ear, let him hear. If anyone is destined for captivity, to captivity he goes. If anyone kills with the sword he must be killed. Here is the perseverance and the faith of the saints. And I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had two horns like a lamb. This is interesting. He was like a lamb, not a lamb, like a lamb. And he spoke as a dragon, and he exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence. Do you see what I'm getting at here? We have in Revelation 13, and this is exactly what was offered to Jesus in Luke chapter 4. I think it was a bona fide offer. Jesus turned it down. It was an offer made by someone who's called a ruler, someone who's described as having a dominion, and whose empire is called an empire of darkness. How in the world did this guy get all of this? Well, I told you one of the stories, the last class period. How he deceived Adam. Adam was given dominion over all the world. And by his deception and trickery of Adam, Adam gave up his dominion. And somehow the trickster ended up with it. That's one of the stories. And of course, he's the antagonism between Adam, or human beings, and the devil has never ended. His goal is to destroy us who are made in the image of God. That's one of the stories that we find. Not in the New Testament. I admit that to you. Although you can see little echoes and reflections of it in the temptation narrative. It's not there. But I need to remind you that none of the stories about this transfer of power are in the New Testament. Have you guys ever listened to Paul Harvey? He's a radio news guy. I'm a carpenter, and so carpenters always listen to Paul Harvey. I've been listening to Paul Harvey ever since the early 70s. He's got this show that he does on his news called The Rest of the Story. You guys ever heard? I see a lot of smiles. You guys have heard this. It's pretty cool, isn't it? In his news broadcast called The Rest of the Story, he'll take like a familiar event or a familiar item to you, like Service Master or like Maytag, you know, a business product or something like that. He'll take that and he'll tell you the story about how that business got started, the people behind it, the things that they did, how hard they worked, and he calls it the rest of the story. And it's always a fantastic experience because you find out about people who went up against unbelievable odds, and through hard work, determination, persistence, they built their own little business world, their little business kingdom. It's very, very fun. He calls it the rest of the story because he tells you all the bits and pieces of the story that you never hear about. And it's fascinating. I've always wondered how in the world he gets all the information about all these little people. He must have a bunch of people doing research for him. So anyway, I want to tell you the rest of the story. Because in the Bible that we use, we have bits and pieces of the story. For example, in Genesis chapter 6, in Genesis 6, it says these things, and this is very disconcerting, very difficult to understand. Listen to this. When mankind began to increase and to spread all over the earth, and daughters were born to them, then the sons of the gods saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, so they took for themselves such women as they chose. But the Lord said, My life-giving spirit shall not remain in man forever. He, for his part, is mortal flesh. He shall live 120 years. Then in those days when the sons of the gods had intercourse with the daughters of men and had children by them, the Nephilim were on the earth. These were the heroes of old, men of renown. Have you guys ever read that and wondered, what in the world is that about? Have you ever wondered that? These sons of the gods, which is translated in the Septuagint as angels, the B'nai Elohim. They were infatuated with daughters of Eve, with women, and they had intercourse with them. In fact, they produced offspring, and these offspring are described as the heroes of old. Okay? The Nephilim. You read that and you think, where in the world did that come from? And what is the rest of that story? Don't you want to know? Well, there's an example of you getting a piece of a story in the Bible. Here's another example. The book of Jude in the New Testament. Comes right before the book of Revelation. It only is a one-chapter book, so I'm referring to verses in the only chapter. So verse 5. Now I desire to remind you, though you know all things once for all, that the Lord, after saving a people out of the land of Egypt, subsequently destroyed those who did not believe. And angels, who did not keep their own domain, but abandoned their proper abode, he has kept in eternal bonds under darkness for the judgment of the great day. Just as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities around them, since they in the same way as these, angels, indulged in gross immorality and went after strange flesh. They are exhibited as an example in undergoing the punishment of eternal fire. Verse 14. And about these also Enoch, in the 7th generation from Adam, prophesied, saying, Behold, the Lord came with many thousands of his holy ones, another reference to angels, to execute judgment upon all, and to convict all the ungodly of their ungodly deeds. Enoch. Some book of Enoch is quoted in the book of Jude. And then another reference to these angels and strange flesh. Have you ever read that and wondered, what is that about? And wished that you could say, hold it, wait, stop. I need a footnote here telling me the rest of this story. Have you ever wanted that? The same thing occurs in 2 Peter. I'm not going to read it because it's almost the same as in Jude. The same sort of oblique reference to this story. I think it's interesting that sometimes in the Bible, you're given information about some event, and it's just not enough information to know what's going on. Do you think maybe sometimes they just assumed that you knew? You ever think that? Sometimes they just made this quick reference to it, and it's almost like they're saying, you know that story, and then they go on. Okay? Sort of like what we do in our world, you know, and in our writing. The problem is, we're like 2,000 years too late, and excuse me, but we don't know the rest of the story. You left just enough there to cause me a lot of anxiety. Have you ever felt that? Am I alone, or does this not? Do you guys ever wonder about that? Well, this whole thing, all of this, is a reference to what I'll call the fall of the Watchers. The Watchers was a certain category of angels. Now, angels in post-exilic Judaism, depending on which book you read, like if you read the Psalms of Solomon, I think in the Psalms of Solomon, or in the Testament of Abraham, there are like 9 orders of angels, all the way from archangels to, and there's a hierarchy of angels, like 9 different levels of angel. Archangels are the most powerful angels, like Michael, Gabriel. In fact, in the pseudepigrapha, in the literature, the post-exilic literature of Judaism that preceded the beginning of the writing of the New Testament, the archangels, one of the archangels was named Satan. In fact, in the Psalms of Solomon, the Satan is described as the most powerful archangel. Have you ever read in the book of Jude how Michael, the archangel, is even afraid to confront him? Have you ever read that? Michael is afraid of him. So even in the archangels, there's rank and strength. This is a formidable foe. He's very powerful. Maybe I can't tell you what he looks like or how tall or the size of his chest and his biceps, but I can tell you one thing. He's strong. In fact, I'll show you in a few minutes how Jesus describes him in a parable as the strong one. I'll show you this. The strong one. So this episode, this thing, the fall of the Watchers were a category of angels whose job it was to watch over the earth. Hence, Watchers, okay? Duh. They were the Watchers. Their job was to watch over men. Okay? As it turns out, these Watchers did a little less watching and a little more mixing. And that's what this fall is about. In fact, in the book of Enoch, which is one of the books in the pseudepigrapha, we have copies of it. Before we got the Dead Sea Scrolls, we also found copies of Enoch in the Dead Sea Scrolls. We don't really think Enoch wrote it, but it was attributed to Enoch, and it is even referred to in the book of Jude. I just read it to you. There is a large section in Enoch on the fall of the Watchers. So if you want to know the rest of the story, or at least one version of the rest of the story, you can find it in Enoch. Just go to the library, ask the librarian, do you want to look at the Old Testament pseudepigrapha, find the book of Enoch, find the section on the fall of the Watchers, and read it. But basically, I'm telling you what happened. These Watchers liked the way you women looked. They produced offspring with you. And these giants ruled over human beings. In fact, they were so cruel to human beings that God said, this is it. And He wiped out all of the giants. The giants were the offspring of the Watchers and the daughters of Eve. The offspring. And do you know the departed, or the spirits of the departed giants, make up the world of the demons? So the demonic world is described in Enoch as the departed spirits of these offspring. And they don't like us either. In some Jewish texts from the post-exilic period, for example, in 1st and 2nd Maccabees, which you guys read, you probably remember, maybe you don't, but I think it's in 2nd Maccabees, where a reference is made to when the devil seduced Eve. According to one storyline in Jewish tradition, Eve wasn't just tricked into eating fruit, she was also seduced. And one of her offspring was from this seduction. So we're not talking here necessarily about paradise lost. No disrespect to Milton. We're not really talking here about paradise lost. We're talking here about cosmos lost. Paradise is a reference to the Garden of Eden. Obviously, the Garden of Eden was lost to Adam. It wasn't gained by the devil. But this was. That's about as good of explanation as I can give you as to the rest of the story that lies behind all of this. In 1 John 3:8, John says that Jesus came to destroy the works of the devil. Luke chapter 11 describes it as an invasion. And the parable that I was telling you about is pretty cool. Let me read it to you. It's very short. Luke 11, verse 21. When the strong one, fully armed, guards his homestead, his possessions are undisturbed. But when someone stronger than he attacks him and overpowers him, he takes away from him all of his armor on which he had relied and distributes his plunder. This parable is used as sort of a commentary on the exorcisms that Jesus was doing. And I find it pretty cool here, the way Jesus describes himself. Okay? He does do justice to the devil, and he calls him the strong one. But what does he call himself? Stronger. See, when a strong man guards his own homestead, his possessions are safe. But if somebody stronger comes in and ties him up, then he is free to take whatever he wants. He's free to steal all of his stuff. And guess what stuff Jesus is up to stealing? You. You guys. Isn't it a lot of interesting things about this parable. For example, Jesus' parables sometimes are tricky because sometimes the bad guy is the good guy and the good guy is the bad guy. Jesus is the thief here. So he portrays himself in this story as the thief, stealing stuff. But that's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. You've got to be really careful when you read these parables. Okay, let's look at this. Pleased to meet you. Do you know my name? What I've included here is just the names of the devil that are found in the New Testament. And I'm pretty sure that this is fairly comprehensive, okay? I haven't given you all the verses, but if you want to know them all, just go to the concordance. Yes? Pardon me? Oh, you don't have one? Does everybody have one of these? You need 4? What did I do? Skip this whole row? Sorry. Here's some of the names of the devil in the New Testament. Devil. It occurs 36 times. Diabolos meant slanderer, and it was a word used to translate Satan in the Old Testament because of its similar meaning. Satan was a Hebrew word that meant slanderer or accuser, and diabolos means pretty much the same thing. Sometimes diabolos can even be translated slanderer. In fact, in 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 1, diabolos is used to refer to people who talk too much. Okay? Women must likewise be dignified, not slanderous. Okay, men don't need this kind of warning, just you ladies. It was a joke, guys. So, diabolos can be translated the slanderer. One other possibility of the verb to slander, one other possibility. Now, diabolos is the noun form of this word. The verb actually means to throw across something, okay? And hence to cross over. One of the objectives of the devil, the diabolos, is to get you to cross over. I remember thinking this when I was watching the movie Star Wars, and they were talking about how Darth Vader had crossed over to the dark side, and they were trying to get Luke Skywalker to cross over, and I'm thinking, whoa, this is biblical theology here. I remember watching an interview of George Lucas once, and he said he was trying to create a myth in the modern era that would have the kind of longevity that some ancient myths had. And I was thinking, you know, you haven't created a new myth. This is as old as the hills and twice as dusty. This is as old as the devil crossing over to the dark side. I think he knew that. He was just giving a new story form to this. Second one is Beelzebub or Beelzebul. Occurs 6 times. in the New Testament. Beelzebul was originally a Philistine deity. The name comes from Baal, which is the word for Lord, and Zebul, which is Ugaritic for the prince, so it's the Lord Prince. The name was rewritten by Jewish scribes in 2 Kings chapter 1, verse 6, to Baal-zebub, which meant Lord of the Flies. So we have Beelzebul turned to Beelzebub as sort of a gotcha transformation. Lord of the Flies, or filth. You know how flies swarm around dead carcasses, so this wasn't a compliment at all. It is this name which gets carried into the New Testament, Beelzebub, where the devil is called the ruler of the demons. The next one, Belial or Beliar, occurs only one time in the New Testament, 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 15. It's also from Jewish literature, and it's from a Hebrew word that means worthlessness. It occurs many, many times in the Dead Sea Scrolls as a reference to this evil spirit. It's a name for the devil and the Antichrist in the pseudepigrapha. We can find Belial referring to the Antichrist in the pseudepigrapha and the devil, both of which we find in the New Testament. Turn the page, page 2. Satan, or Satan, is from the Hebrew word Satan. It means accuser, prosecutor, or adversary. Any human being can be a Satan, an adversary. Okay? So it's an adjective and a noun. But when it's used as a noun, it's referring to a particular person. Hadad the Edomite was a Satan to Solomon in 1 Kings 11. Even the angel of the Lord was a Satan to Balaam in Numbers 22. It's translated in the Septuagint, or the Greek version of the Old Testament, as diabolos. Hence, the word gets transferred into the New Testament as diabolos. It's a synonym for Satan, or slanderer. In ancient Persia, there was actually a political office of accuser. He worked for the king, and his job was to find unfaithful people in the kingdom that the king could not trust. That was his job. He was sort of, an FBI agent looking for undercover enemies of the state in the population. The accuser did that in the courts of the law, and he became an adversary of the defendant. In fact, we find this whole complex ideas of adversary and accuser and advocate in the New Testament, because he is our adversary, he is our accuser, and Jesus is our advocate. These are all legal terms referring to things that are happening in the legal court, royal court of God, if you can picture it that way. The strong one we talked about. The evil one, 17 times in the New Testament. This just is simply a taking of the adjective evil, paneros, and making a verb or a noun out of it by giving it the definite article, the evil one. Find it quite a few times in some very memorable places, like in the Lord's Prayer. The evil one is referred to. Destroyer. This occurs one time in the New Testament, 1 Corinthians chapter 10. I'm not sure if this is the devil or not. The dragon. This occurs 12 times in the New Testament, only in the book of Revelation. And for that reason, it's especially interesting, but for reasons that I have no time to go into right now. But I do go into it in some detail in my class on comparative religions. Death. Death is a word that occurs many times in the New Testament, but at least 8 times, I think it refers to this enemy of God, the devil. He's personified as death, just as Jesus personifies himself as life. The enemy. The enemy is a very interesting one. It only occurs 4 times in the New Testament, but I would encourage you to look these up because these are very significant. He's called the enemy. Whose enemy? God's? Yours? He's not a friend. The Antichrist 5 times in the New Testament. The tempter twice. The last page. He's called the ruler of the power of the air. 1 time in the New Testament. Although the important part of this might not be the ruler of the power of the air, might be just, the important part of this might just be that he's the ruler. He's the ruler of the kingdom of darkness. He's the ruler of the demons. He's the ruler of the power of the air. He's the ruler of all these different ways. Paul even refers to him as the God of this world in Corinthians. He's the father of lies. He's called a liar and the father of lies. 666, 1 time in the New Testament. It might be a reference to his protege and not actually him, but it is definitely a reference to him and his ruling party. Lucifer is not found in the New Testament. It's only found in the Old Testament, the Latin translation of the Old Testament. In Isaiah 14, verses 1 through 23, it says, "How you have fallen from heaven, O morning star." Morning star, that's the word that's translated Lucifer in the Vulgate. And we may have a reference to this in Luke chapter 10 when Jesus says, "And I was watching Satan fall from heaven like lightning." The activities of this person are that he deceives, he slanders, he accuses, he lies, he tests, he tempts, he blinds, he darkens, he veils, he tricks, he makes deals. He causes sickness, he causes death, insanity, disability. You name it, he's behind it. And it is all of his work and his kingdom that Jesus came to destroy. And to me, this is a fundamentally important dimension of the life and ministry and teaching of Jesus. But starting next Tuesday, we're going to be looking at another dimension of Jesus' teaching, the sermon and the parables. And so we will sort of be moving past this. And we'll also be moving past a lot of the war imagery that is used to describe this. And we'll be moving into a completely new set of language and images of Jesus, which are nevertheless accurate. I'll see you on Tuesday.